All right, so hello and welcome to the SLIS Career Colloquium session. This is Jill Cleese, and I am the SJSU Career Consultant for SLIS students and alumni. And I'd like to thank you for joining us tonight for our discussion on the evolving career of a public librarian. We have the great pleasure to have Lisa Rosenblum with us tonight, and she's going to share her insight and expertise on pursuing a career in a public library. So let's get ourselves started, and I'm going to have Lisa, you take it away. So here you go.
I am the Director of Library Community Services for the City of Sunnyvale. That's a town in Silicon Valley, for those of you who are not from the Bay Area. And also, I'm a SLIS instructor. I'm an adjunct lecturer. I teach information, organization, and management. And as a matter of fact, this coming week, I actually talk about the same topic in my class. So I want to welcome all of you that are here live, and I also want to welcome those of you who will be joining us in an archive session. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your listening to me. So with that, I just want to let you know that the evolving career of a public librarian is more of a generic term. It's not about my career. So rest assured, I won't be talking about me. But here's what I will be talking about today. I'm going to talk about the current employment environment, public library trends in hiring, and finally tips on applying and interviewing. And this is from my perspective as a professional for 30 years, but more importantly as somebody who has hired many, many people these last 10 years. It is not Bay Area specific, although some of the hiring and employment trends are, I will talk a little bit about the Bay Area, but it will also apply for those of you who are living all across the country, because I think public libraries pretty much are similar all across the country. And then, of course, afterwards, as Jill mentioned, I will allow plenty of time for you to ask any questions you may have. Okay, well, I call this good news, bad news scenario. Here's the good news. As you know, we've been sort of in a slump with our employment. We had some real difficult times the last 2 years. But as you can see, as of October 2012, we're moving up as far as our employment. We're starting to hire again. This is really good news. But the not so good news is, and by the way, a lot of the people we're hiring are in the high-tech sector. The Bay Area in particular has had a phenomenal surge, but these are in certain kinds of professions, such as obviously software engineers and the people that support them, such as your HR people, your finance people, your accountants. So here's where we're hiring. But the bad news is that I love this total non-farm. That's what we are. We're non-farm. And if you look at the bottom right here, we see in government. And for those of you who don't know, if you work in the public sector in a public library, you are working for government. So if you're working for a city library, if you want to get a job in a county library or a state library, that is government. So this is the figure we're looking at. And as you can see, there's a negative numbers here. So not only are we not hiring in the public sector, which is government, we are going down as far as we're not hiring, and we're losing positions. And this makes sense because for two reasons. First of all, there's a saying that the public sector is about 2 years behind the private sector when it comes to recovery. So what we're still in our slump while the private sector is expanding, and we expect in another year or two to see practice holds that we'll see more hiring. But the other sort of negative thing we have to look at is that this wasn't just like a normal cycle of boom or bust that we saw these last couple of years. The public sector has really taken a hit. When we're laying off police and fire in our cities, that's pretty significant. And I could give you a lot of information about why we're not hiring and why things are not as good as we thought. But I can say the recovery will not be, in my opinion, as robust as we've seen in the past. Part of this has to do with the issue of pensions and public sector benefits that, as you know, is really hot in the news these days. It's not going away. Many cities are adopting two-tier pension systems. They're trying to control their costs. And cities, quite frankly, and counties are scared. They don't want to just hire a bunch of people right away. And the people they tend to hire are what is called core services. That's police and fire and public works. Those are your roads. So as much as I love libraries, public libraries in general are not considered a core service. They're considered something that is important, but not a core service. So they tend to get funded behind public safety and streets and roads. And so even when we do hire, we are probably going to be behind those other departments as far as how many people we can hire. And don't just believe me. Here's what the official sources are saying. This is the government puts out this job outlook for librarians. And if you look at the bottom, you'll see that budget limitations, especially in local government, makes low demand. What we're seeing right now is a reduction in the size of the staff, and quite honestly, seeing if we can staff with fewer librarians and other what we call paraprofessional, who can do some of the librarian's duties. I wouldn't call it librarian's duties. I would say some of the duties that do not require a master's degree. So that is what we're seeing now in the public libraries. And this is just supported, of course, by Library Journal. And you can see that the key jobs, the full-time jobs, they're going down 12.5% as of 2009. That was just one sample of what we're seeing now. Now, I don't want you to get depressed, but I do think it's important that I tell you what's going on right now in 2012. So, what are we looking for when we hire new librarians? And one of the things I want to tell you is the reason I gave you this information is there are jobs in the public library. We're slowly starting to hire, but there's a lot of people going for those jobs. So you're going to be applying in a very competitive environment. So hopefully after this presentation, I'm going to give you some tips to assist you. So what are we looking for in the new public library? Well, I love this slide. We're not looking for this. I often say to my staff, remember the public and public library. What we are looking for are people with people skills, but truly who want to be around people and assist people every day, 8 hours a day. And our libraries these days, we serve a wide variety of people. We mirror society. Society is no longer homogeneous like it was in the past. We have a lot of diversity in our communities, a lot of skill sets. We have people that don't have homes. We have people that are new to this country. And this is one of the reasons why I love working in a public library, because it's so interesting and you're really helping your community. But it isn't like the old days. So you really, if you're gonna go into the public library, you really have to like people. Some of the other things we're looking for when we hire is it used to be you could work in a public library, and if you weren't as enamored of people, you'd get a job cataloging in the back room, doing technical services. What we're finding now is if we do have a back room, we do expect our staff to assist in the front room in the public area. So those jobs are going away. They're being outsourced, and the trend is to hire less people. If we hire, for instance, a cataloger or somebody to do processing of tech services, we also do expect them to do other things. So for instance, I have this wonderful cataloger. She's a professional librarian. She's fluent in Chinese. And in the past, she was just used in the back room, but because of her skill set and because my community has a large Chinese population, she now occasionally she does programming in Chinese. She's wonderful at it. We draw a lot of people to it. So she's being pulled from the back room to assist in our programming. And I think that's really a good thing, because I think people really do bring a lot of skills to their communities. and we need to take advantage of them. Also, we want you to play well with others. Well, what do I mean by that? You notice that my title is Director of Library and Community Services. I started as just a library director, and my department was merged, and I also am Director of Recreation Programs, which includes day camps, teen camps, pools, swim lessons, community theater, a senior center, social services that we provide up in our community. We have a social services center where we deal with a wide variety of socioeconomic issues. And finally, I do events. So the last summer, I actually was in charge of the centennial celebration for our city. So the reason I tell you this is that even if you're hired as a librarian in a library department or division, there's a good chance that you might be part of a larger department that includes something like recreation. And what I'm looking for when I hire is somebody that will work well with other people in other departments of the city or with even my department. So for example, my children's librarian manager works closely with the team coordinator in community services, the one that does the day camps. And they've created some literacy programs and some story times up in community centers. They go out to day camps and read stories. So what I'm looking for is somebody that recognizes it and enjoys working with others that maybe have different skill sets and different missions, but wants to work together for the joint mission of my department. I'm also looking for flexibility, and what I mean by that is that tech service librarian that I might hire, that person is probably going to be put out on a reference desk. I'm looking for hybrid skills, so if you want to sell yourself, don't say you just want to be a children's librarian, although there's nothing wrong with that. You can say, well, I would like to work with teens and toddlers, or if you're good with social networking, sell your skills. Make sure you tell us that your skills, you're good at uploading, you can do some web work. I'm looking for people that are can think flexibly and act that way so that they don't feel like it's an imposition to occasionally work with kids. And by the way, I want to tell you, if you're going to work in the public library, even if you're not assigned to children, you need to like them or at least be able to tolerate them for 8 hours a day because children are our bread and butter. Parents and kids, that's what keeps us going, and they're part of what we do, and it's really exciting to get them involved in the library and literacy. But you're going to encounter them. They're going to be noisy, and I hope that's what you really want to do because that's what you're going to see in the public library. Speaking of literacy, there's a relatively new term out there. Those of you who are taking classes in SLIS know this term probably. We're looking for people with transliteracy skills. It's not just the wide variety of e-book readers that we teach people how to use. It's also truly communicating with people who have a wide variety of skill sets. So we're looking for people that can teach that. And if I can say the most important thing, that our librarians are teachers. They teach people how to do stuff. It used to be, when I started out, that we were the main information providers, and we're not anymore. They can do a lot of this pretty well by themselves. What we do really well is we teach people how to interact across, as you saw, a wide range of platforms. They're going to be changing. So you need to want to learn all the time and be able to convey that learning to a wide variety of people. And finally, I learned this from my son, who's 24. He is not working in a library, but it used to be in the old days that if you jumped around, if you went from one job to the other every 1 or 2 years, that was considered a bad thing. So I want to tell you, because a lot of you are looking for your first job, that jumping around, or maybe this is your second career, is not a bad thing. But just be sure that when you're interviewed, you kind of explain it. So for instance, I just interviewed somebody who she wanted a pretty high-level position. She was at one time wanted to be a sheep farmer, and she put it on her resume, and then she explained that that's what she started. It didn't work out, and so she decided to do something else. There's nothing wrong with that, but just be prepared to explain it if you move around every 1 or 2 years, because when we hire, we are looking for some consistency. It isn't like it used to be, but we are looking for some consistency in your career growth and pattern. And finally, don't take my word for it. If you're at all interested in working in a public library, you need to do an internship. I cannot emphasize enough. I emphasize it in my class. Dr. Fisher at SLIS is the one to talk to about this, but internships are a great way for you to learn about the business. And if you have an internship at a public library, I always make sure that my managers give you interesting work to do, not just sitting on a reference desk or shadowing. Projects that really use your skill set. You know, you students, when you come in, you have wonderful skills, especially with the technology that some of my librarians don't have. And so I want to encourage those of you who are interested to do an internship. The other thing that an internship does is it gives you a jump up on other people, providing you do a good job. And what I mean by that is that when you do an internship and they see what a phenomenal job you're doing, the next time a job comes up, they know you, and they'll be more likely to interview you and even hire you. So again, see what you can do. I just checked out the internship board the other day, and there's a lot of them being offered. So, you know, contact the library, be proactive, and really consider doing that. So, now if you're going to be looking for a job, nowadays, you know, there's lots of places you can be looking for jobs. I just listed a couple of them. Obviously, you need to be on job boards. You need to be, everything is listed now on job boards, nothing on paper. I'm not going to go into LinkedIn, but you should have a LinkedIn account and, you know, talk a little bit about yourself. LinkedIn is the professional, I call it the professional Facebook. And there are a lot of job boards, and one that I'm going to talk about specifically that applies to cities are CalOps, it's in California, and NeoGov. Let's talk about the application process. I'm not going to go over resumes because hopefully you've gone through the great tutorial that SLIS offers on how to write a resume. I will tell you that don't just rely on the resume when you're applying, and I'm going to talk about that in a couple slides over. Actually, this next slide. So here's an example of what you will be faced with when you're looking for a job in a city or a county. Every city or county has an HR department, and they usually have a page where the new jobs are listed. This one is NeoGov, and it's for the city of Sunnyvale. And you'll notice in here, if you can see it, you can actually check the jobs you're interested, and you can create a notification. And what I would do if I were you is I'd pick the cities that I was interested in and go into each of them. I don't think you can do it universally. I could be wrong. But click on the library jobs and put your email in. And it does really work. They will notify you when a job comes up in these cities. So that's the first thing that I would do. And so check around for a city. Now, all of these applications are online. And there's a couple tricks you need to learn, and that is that because it's so easy now to apply for jobs, it used to be you had to submit in paper and send it in, and it was a little more work. Let's see, 2 years ago I listed a library, and this was in the height of the slump, and it was for one librarian, full-time and one part-time, and I got about 200 applications. That's a lot of applications, and of those 200, many of them were people that were really very qualified. This is an entry-level librarian position. So what are the reasons that they got chosen by me for the interview, and what are the reasons they didn't? Well, it's a little known secret that these applications are auto-scored. Before I even see them, they have to go through a process. And one of the processes they go through is they're auto-scored, which means if you leave anything out in this application, if you don't fill in a dot, if you don't write a supplemental, if you leave anything out, you're screened out. The other thing you need to do is don't rely just on the resume. Don't say, see resume for more information. If they ask you a supplemental question, and I'll go into those in a minute, you need to fill out the supplemental questions completely. And the reason we do supplemental questions, two reasons. First of all, because I want to know more about you, and I'm going to be putting questions on there that help me learn more about you. But the other thing we do, reason we use them, is that it helps me actually screen you out. If you can't answer the question clearly, if you have a lot of spelling mistakes, God forbid you handwrite it, although I don't know how you would do it. If you do a PDF, don't do that, by the way, don't handwrite them. These are things we're looking for in the supplemental question. So be sure you completely fill out the supplemental question, that you have your grammar is good, your spelling is good. This is the only way I'm going to meet you. This is the first time I'm going to meet you, which is online. And again, I cannot emphasize enough, fill the application out completely. I have an example of somebody, she was very well qualified, but the job required a cover letter, and she forgot to do it. And so she was screened out. And that's really a shame. So please do that. Okay, and that's it for the application. They're all a little different. Now we're going to go into some interview tips, and again, this is based on my experience, and like any free advice, you're free to take it or not, but these are just things that I've noted in the last couple years hiring librarians. First of all, do your homework, and I would say there's no excuse in our digital online age for you not to do that. It's very easy to do it. Before you go in, check out the website, check out the city's website and the county website. Those of you who have taken 204 know there's an element called environmental scanning. It's a great skill to learn. Go into the library, look around, and be sure to mention that in the interview. I'm always impressed when candidates tell me, oh, I noticed you have a really good presence on Facebook, or I noticed that you took a hit in your budget. It shows me that you really made an effort to learn about my library, and you really are trying to impress me. So do your homework. The other thing is, if you're trying to impress, you need to dress the part. And what I mean by that is, obviously, I'm not going to tell you to go out and buy a three-piece suit. If a lot of libraries are pretty casual. But what I am going to say, and this is what I advise my students, is go into the library, look around, look at how the librarians are dressing, and then dress one level above that. Because it's important that you show that you take this seriously and you've made an effort. So if you want, you can wear pants. If you're a woman, go out and get a jacket. It might be nice. Or guys, you know, and I'm saying you have to wear a tie, but wear a shirt that's pressed, or, you know, or something nice, something that doesn't have holes in it. You know, I know this is subjective, and this is totally my opinion, and if you're a wonderful candidate, it isn't going to make a difference to me, but it will make a difference if I have 10 people that are all the same, and you made an effort to really, you made an effort for the interview. And again, let's go back to the first couple slides. It's a very competitive environment, so you just need to be aware of that. Well, we know you don't want to be there. We know that interviews are like pulling teeth, and we feel your pain. Those of us who interview you feel your pain. However, we want you to act like you want to be there, smile, be positive, be enthusiastic, you know, don't be too fake, but, you know, act like you want to be there, and that this is something this is a job that you are really excited to get it. You know, try to impress us. Answer the questions clearly and succinctly. You'd be surprised that people get nervous and they talk on, and usually a good interviewer or somebody experienced knows that, and we'll take that into account. But try to answer the question that you get, and answer it in a way that's both concise but also clear. I'll tell you, a story. When I first interviewed for my first management job, I followed this advice, but too well. I was too succinct, and the interview was over in 15 minutes. The manager who knew me, because it was an internal promotional opportunity, was horrified. She had to explain to them, no, she's really good. So just, you know, balance it out a little bit. But what I tend to see is people get really nervous and they talk and talk and talk. So try to balance it a little bit. You know, the interviewers are we're not trying to get you. We really want you to succeed. So just bear that in mind. And the other thing that I recommend is at the end of the interview, ask some questions about the library. Do you know, because we always ask you at the end, is there anything you want to know about or anything you'd like to ask us about? And feel free to ask something about the library. That always impresses me, too. So you're done, you leave, and so if you make it to the first round, there's going to be another interview, and that's called the final hiring interview. Now, you're going to have a different recruitment board. Usually it's somebody higher up, the hiring manager or maybe the director. So don't assume we know anything about you. You're going to have to start all over again. You're going to have to explain why you want the job, do everything that I just said before. If you happen to work internally, let's say you're a library assistant and you got your degree and you want to be a librarian, act as if, even if you've worked with these people for 20 years, act as if you don't know them. And what I mean by that is try to impress us. Don't assume that we know all about you. Even if we do, there might be somebody on the panel that doesn't. And it's a mistake a lot of internal candidates make. They don't make the effort. And remember, you're going to be competing sometimes with external candidates. So don't assume, go in there with the same energy, even if you've worked with these people for 20 years. And also, occasionally it happens, it's still bad form to talk about compensation or your work schedule before you're hired, or unless they bring it up. So if I brought it up and say, can you work evenings and weekends? It's okay if I bring it up, but if you come in and just say, I can't work evenings and weekends, or I want this schedule, or I have to get this amount of money, that's kind of bad form. There's plenty of time to do that during the negotiation phase, so try not to ask that question. And sometimes if you don't get hired, by the way, everybody doesn't get hired. There's always jobs that you go for and you don't get, so don't feel bad about it. A lot of times it's not the right fit, and it's nothing about you, it's just not the right fit for that organization. You can ask the people who interviewed you why, but I have a little asterisk by this because they may not tell you. Cities need to be careful what they say to potential candidates or people that they don't hire. So that's kind of, you can ask why, and they might tell you generically why you didn't get a job, but I just want to just give you a little caveat on that one. Try again. I mean, don't get disappointed. If you want to work in a public library, as I said before, sometimes it's just not the right fit. Sometimes they have somebody there that maybe has a year or two more experience than you do. But interviewing is actually a good idea, especially, you know, practice makes perfect, and the more you interview, the better you get at it. And so it's not a bad thing if you don't get hired. Some people just go on interviews just to keep their resume up and keep their skills up. They don't think they're going to get the job, but they just try, and, you know, it's just a good practice. If you tend to get nervous, and some of us do, you can practice with a friend that's really supportive that can help you. And then the other thing is you might want to widen your net. So let's just say you want to work at this particular library, you love this library system, but you've tried a couple times, it's just not working. You might want to think of another library system, maybe further away. You might want to think of, if you just want to do children's work and you can't get hired there, you might want to say, okay, well, I'm interested, I'll do teen work, I'll do adult work, I'll do this work. So, you know, if you get to that point, I would recommend you see if there are other options. In this environment, it might mean you need to move. You might need to leave the area. For instance, the Bay Area is a really lovely place to live in. It's also pretty expensive, but there are other places in the country that maybe are hiring, and you could start there. You can always use that as a jumping off point, and it doesn't mean you have to stay in that library forever. As a matter of fact, I probably wouldn't recommend you do that. But that gets you that experience, that foot in the door. So I tend to be pretty succinct, and I can see I've only taken a half an hour of your time, and so now I'm really here to answer any of your questions.
So Lisa, this is Jill. Looks like there's some students that are going to be typing in their questions. I can see them in the process of writing something in the chat box. So we'll wait for those to come in. And I appreciate everything you said, because so much of what you talked about in regards to resume writing, interviewing skills, even the possibility of when they don't get hired is everything that I would say to people too. So I love that. Here's the first question. She says, I always get stuck on the, do you have any questions for us at the end of the interview? Can you give us some more ideas or examples of good questions to ask? So I will let go of the mic, and here you go.
Thank you. And actually, you do need to repeat the questions because I got to get back in the room. I got it. Okay. Yes. Let me give you an example. For instance, what is your vision of this library? Where do you see the future of this library? What's your philosophy on, something broad, but something that sort of shows that you're engaged in this library. Or like, I noticed that there are a lot of seniors that come in to the library at 10 o'clock in the morning. Where do you think the direction is going to help them use the library more? Something like that.
Richard says, oops, hold on, I lost it. Come back, Richard. Question. There it is. Richard asks, I've heard there's a big demand for children's librarians. And that went past again. Hold on. Big demand. Where is it? They keep moving. For children's librarians, what about adult librarians / adult services librarians?
I think what we're looking for, it depends on the library, but a lot of libraries are, even larger systems have branches. They're looking for more generalists, people that are willing to do a story time. Absolutely right. The trend is for more children's librarians because they're sort of our bread and butter. And a good children's librarian has more what I call transferable skills.
So Lisa, in regards to children's librarians, so say that wasn't a student's main focus, but as you're mentioning, that's sort of the bread and butter of the library, and somebody wants to get into public librarians or libraries. Would it work if they took just one class through the SLIS program that related to children's or youth librarianship and used that as kind of a jumping off point for a public library for that, or do they need more experience, I guess is what I'm asking, on the children's librarian side to be competitive for that kind of work?
In the old days, you could say you took a children's class and you liked working with children. Not anymore. To answer your question, Jill, not only should you take children's classes at library school, you should work in a library with children as far as an internship. That's how competitive it is right now. That's what I'm looking for. Somebody who has worked with children. Now, you could work with children, for instance, in a day camp. You could have been a preschool teacher. That would be great. But you need to have some experience.
Thanks, Lisa. That helps. What do you do when you have been in the same job for 20 years and the jobs you had in the past no longer exist? Do you write them in any way in the resume?
Again, long resumes are my pet peeve. Do not have a long resume. If you're applying for a job, for instance, in a public library where you want to be like a web person, you might want to cut out the things that you did 25 years ago that have nothing to do with it. Just put just the relevant experience in your resume.
So what she's saying, everybody, is the same kind of messaging that I'll talk about when I do resume workshops is that you got to tailor your resume for the particular job. And it's good advice to not go back more than 10 to 15 years in your work experience. I'm going to try to stick to the questions, Lisa, that are a little more focused on public libraries. So here's one that says, what positions are available for more technology-oriented grads at a public library? My focus is emerging technology, but I love working with teens. That's a good question.
Well, I would love to hire you because that's absolutely what we're looking for. We're looking for people that can have a couple of skill sets. So for emerging technologies with teens, you know, create a new kind of, well, just really simply, you could create a YouTube, an online presence. You could get them to, we're talking about creating things in the library, labs, creation labs, maker spaces. Technology and teens actually is a really good combination. So sell yourself that not only do you like teens, but you also have the skill set. You're very good and you're very interested in pushing forward new technologies.
Nice. Here's another question. This one says, are info people or other post-professional courses respected by hiring librarians?
I send my staff to info people all the time. I think info people classes are really good. And certainly if you're interested, let's say, in doing, I'll use teen again, teamwork, and you put on your resume that you took an info people class on providing teen services, that would be a good thing. But again, I need to focus on, you also need to, that's one aspect of you getting hired. So yes, that would be fine.
Thanks. Okay, this is a question from Steve. And Steve, I'm not sure if I completely understand it, but it says, how about a backup working in a school system plus library part-time? I'm wondering if the question is kind of how competitive would he be for a public librarian position if he's a backup working in a school system plus works in a library part-time?
Well, working in a school is great because it shows you like working with children and the public. So I think that any experience you can get, and that's a really good question because the more experience you have as a librarian will give you a leg up on getting a job as a librarian. I know it sounds kind of funny, but what we're seeing now is, it used to be you got out of grad school and you would get hired if you did well in the interview. Now what we're seeing is you need to have some experience in a library first before I would even consider interviewing you. And I know it's harsh for me to say this, but this is the reality now because we're getting such qualified people. So yes, the more experience you can get, and schools are a good place to get it because they're very similar to what public libraries do.
That's great information, and that goes back to echoing the thought of having an internship, doing some volunteer work somewhere while you're still a student getting some experience. Here's another question from, I believe the name is Sakina, and it says, in the application forms have been asked about age and gender, though those are not required. Would you recommend skipping or answering them?
Well, you're absolutely right. They're not required. I don't even look at them. The only thing I would say is if you have a skill that you think would help, such as a language skill, a fluency, you need to put that in. Let us know that. But as far as age or anything like that, you do what you're comfortable doing. It is not required. And as far as it makes no difference to me. I'm looking for a skill set. I'm not looking at that stuff.
Thanks, Lisa. Here's another question. This one's from Jen. I know you mentioned needing an internship. Is that still something we should try to do if we have already been working in a public library?
Well, it depends. If you work in a public library as a paraprofessional, as a library assistant, I would strongly recommend you work in another public library as a library intern. And the reason I'm saying it is that you need to show that, that you have this skill set, and the best way to do it is to go to another library. As a matter of fact, I think she's actually here. One of my staff did that, and she worked as a paraprofessional, got her library degree, and she did an internship at another library. So I think it's a great idea.
So here's another question from, looks like from Jay. Should your resume include somewhat relevant details like fine art courses or skills for an arts librarian position, or would that be too detailed?
I don't really hire arts librarians. I think public libraries in bigger systems such as Boston or those that have big name libraries probably do. They're called subject specialists. So yes, definitely if you want a job in that particular area, emphasizing your undergraduate degree, or if you have a second graduate degree, that would be important, and also to talk about that in the interview. You might mention that the first question you usually get in an interview is, what are your skills or what are your qualifications that think you'll be a good candidate for this position? And you might want to mention that, that you do have that art background, and let's say, and tie it into something that public librarians do. So for instance, I have that art background and I can use that to create great after school craft projects for teens.
Yeah, I like that. That's a really good suggestion. Here's another question. This one was from a little earlier on. This is from Lori. When explaining gaps in a resume, how much personal information should you reveal, i.e., I took off time to raise my children? How would you feel about hearing something like that in an interview, or even seeing that on a resume?
Well, I'm somewhat prejudiced here because I did that. I actually didn't take time off to raise my children, but I worked part-time for many years because I had small children and I chose not to work full-time. So what I say is I own it. I say to them, I took off this time because I had small children and I wanted to do this, but I remained professionally involved. So I would say that if you're comfortable explaining the gap, it might be a good thing to say it. It would show that you could work if you wanted to, but you chose to do something different, and I think that's appropriate.
Okay, I'm checking through to see if we have some more questions. Here's another one from Lori. Is volunteering in a library helpful if an internship is not available, or is the volunteer responsibilities not in-depth enough? That's a good question.
Yes, it's a very good question, and yes, absolutely. Volunteering, if you can get an internship, the next thing I look for is, did you make an effort to work in a public library? You tell me you want to work in my library, but what have you done on your own to show that you're truly interested? And volunteering is a wonderful way to show that. And when you do that, talk about not only what you did, but how you contributed to that library. What skill set did you bring to help, let's say, that children's library do that program? And I want to tell you, I've seen volunteers do some really high-level stuff. So that's a really good idea.
Thanks, Lisa. That was a good answer. There's another question that's actually quite similar. And it might be asking the same question, but I'm going to take a different twist on it. So when they're filling out their application, I guess as part of the scorecard or the scoring, or before, or when the applications get sent to you, would you be kind of totaling or tallying up the amount of time that people have worked at, as an intern or in a particular job to count towards experience? And if so, if they had volunteered experience, does that count as, months or years of experience when you're calculating that for people?
don't really do that level of calculation. What I do is see what is it you actually did. It's not the number of years so much as what you actually did. So certainly I look at it, but if you could volunteer for 20 years, and if you did the same thing for 20 years, that probably would impress me less than if you were a volunteer at a number of organizations and did different things. And by the way, that also gets back to if you take some time off, let's say for whatever reason, to raise children or whatever, put in that PTA experience. Put in whatever you did as volunteer work, because even if it's not directly volunteering in a library, that shows me that you're active, that you're good with people, that you're good with numbers, and that you stay involved. And I know raising children is hard work, trust me, but putting that stuff in is really important too. I do look at a lot of things when I look at an interview, so put it in there.
No, that's helpful. That's perfect. Thank you. So we still have some more questions. We've got about 9 more minutes here. So this one's from Vaughn. It says, I currently work in a K-8 library and am interested in intergenerational public library programming. Would I be well advised to focus in SJSU's program on children's librarianship or general public library programming and services?
Well, I guess I don't see that as an either or. I would do both. I would get as much experience and take classes that are really geared towards the public library as you can. And certainly programming is important. Children's work is important. If you're not as interested in children, you might want to take a couple classes, but then do what you're really interested in. Ultimately, you know, I think graduate school is not just vocational. It should be things you're interested in. You should take classes you want to take also. So if you're interested in it, you should take it. And you know what? If you're smart, you'll be able to turn it into a skill set that a public library would need. And you need an archival work. If you're working in a large public library that has, let's say, an historical collection, you probably could use that also. So I guess I just want, you know, take the classes you really want to take and you're interested in.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for that answer. Here's another question from Amy. Is having multiple internships that only last a year or less better or worse than working at one internship for many years?
I'm not sure if you can, I could be wrong, if you can work for one library for many years. I would say, just my personal opinion is, I would like to see a variety of I think it's good to get a variety, so you can work in one public library one semester, do a different one for another semester. But, you know, that's sort of, I think the most important thing is what you do, and that it be at highest level as possible, and you telling me what you did and how it would be good for me to hire you, how it's going to help my library.
Thanks, Lisa. And Jane Fisher also added a note that SLIS internships that are through the Library 294 class are usually only one semester long. So it might be that someone's doing an internship for a semester, or maybe you're volunteering it for a longer period of time. We have some more questions here. And if for some reason we don't get to all of these questions, I can take them down and I'll post them on the SLIS career blog. We'll get the answers to them because we still have lots of good questions, which I love. So thanks everybody for being so participative. Participative? That's the word. All right, here's another question. How are academic and public libraries different from a librarian's perspective? Here we go.
Well, I happen to have worked in both because I used to be worked for the King Library, which is a merged library, and I could teach a course on that library. How are they different? Academics tend to do more research and writing. They do have some public experience, but not as much as a public librarian has as far as being on the floor and doing, I think there's a little more hand-holding in the public library. You're getting people that are more diverse, versus a university clientele, which basically people are pretty much of the same focus and age. So I think there's a little more variety in public library work, and I think it really depends on what you're interested in. But there is some difference.
Thanks, Lisa. Let's see. This is from Elizabeth. Would you recommend taking the page test and working as a page over an internship?
Again, either or. Obviously, you need to make some money. So if you need to make money and you want to be a page, go for it. I would still recommend, though, you be an intern because you need to be seen as a librarian if you want to be hired as a librarian. So get an internship as a librarian working with librarians in another system.
So there's 2 questions left here right now that I think we can get to. This is a good one, Lisa. This is from Carrie, and it says, are out-of-town candidates taken seriously? And if not, how can they be? And that may have to do with maybe with budget issues. I don't think you'd be paying to have them come out for an interview. So address that one for us, please.
You're absolutely right, Jill. Generally, at entry-level positions, a city is not, or county is not going to pay for you to come out to interview. Are they taken seriously? Absolutely. They're like all other candidates. They're no better, no worse. And especially, you know, so if you can afford it, you need to do it. But just be aware, at this level, unfortunately, you do have to pay your own way. So, but yes, they are taken seriously.
Great, thank you. Here's a question from Steve. Should an application be typed or handwritten in black ink? That's a very detailed, interesting question.
You need to type it. I said so earlier, and just type it. It's a lot easier for me to read, and it shows that, quite honestly, although in this day and age we just assume that you do have the technology skills, just the core ones. So yeah, type it.
All right, here's one more from Elizabeth. I think, Lisa, I think you've gotten the most questions for any speaker ever, by the way. Okay, so this one's from Elizabeth. Would you be interested in hiring someone who has experience working at a bookstore as opposed to working in a library, since it involves working with books? Here you go.
Well, again, I certainly would be interested. I love people that come from retail, and bookstores are retail because you have that more of the customer service attitude. I know you talked about books, but certainly that and also the retail attitude. So I guess it's not an either or. What I am looking for is some experience, and certainly a bookstore is a good way to get experience.
Thanks, Lisa. We'll take one last question. This is from Jane Fisher, and she was commenting on your answer to the question about academic librarians versus public librarians. And she's adding to that question, would you say that academic librarians may be asked to do more instruction, so an instructional class through the MLIS program is valuable if you're aiming at academic librarianships, and would you say that's true or not true?
Yes, I do think academic librarians, I think it's part of what they do. It's called information literacy, and they do a lot of classes on basic classes on how to use information sources. And they do a lot of classes, by the way, online. So any classes you can take to learn how to do that kind of instruction would be very helpful to get a job in an academic library. But for me, I have to tell you that my librarians are teachers, and they teach classes, for instance, on how to use ebooks and how to research patents and a wide variety. So taking those instructional classes to help you design a course, it'd be very helpful in the public library, because that's another thing we're really looking for expanding to, teaching people in a more formalized instructional area. So yes.
Excellent, thanks. There's one last question that was posted on here, and it's a clarification question, Lisa, so let's just go ahead and take this one. And then everybody, if you have additional questions that didn't get addressed, you may email them to me if you like, and I can get the answers from Lisa, and then I can post them on the SLIS Career blog, so know that that's still an option. So this clarification question from Jen says, let's see, as a clarification to my internship question, I'm currently working at a small library where I do story hours, toddler programs, circulation, and reference. I've also done paging and children's prep work at other libraries as well as worked in the library all 4 years in undergrad. So I'm just wondering if I should still try and get into an internship somewhere else. Like, should she do more, or is what she have, you think that's enough? What would you recommend?
Well, I want to applaud you for all that you're doing. That's quite a bit. And since you're doing more librarian work, I don't think it would be as necessary. I guess what I'm trying to address, if you are a page or a circulation clerk and you're not doing that kind of story times and those kind of things, you really do need to get that experience, and getting it somewhere else oftentimes is helpful. But no, it's up to you. If you're doing that kind of work, again, the most important thing is that you communicate that in the interview, in the supplemental questions, and during the entire process.
I want to thank you so much for your time. Thank you for taking all the questions. This has truly been one of the most interactive career colloquy sessions we have had. So I applaud you. This will be recorded. We'll have it on the SLIS website. Thank you so much, everyone, for your participation. And again, Lisa, thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate it.